Greetings, friends. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining me once again. It's always a pleasure to see you. It's a pleasure to see you every week. I look forward to doing this show. I know how much you all enjoy it. And I hope you all had a fantastic week. Now, while I do not know for sure, I would suspect that our good friends at Steve and Florence went to Chicago for the final farewell set of Grateful Dead concerts. Hey, if they could go to Giza, they could certainly go to Chicago. Now, I had thought of going myself, but I just didn't get the tickets in time. But I bet a lot of people came to hear Uncle John's band by the riverside. Got some things to talk about. There beside the rising tide. And friends, there seems to be a rising tide all over the world these days. And I see there was an auctioned off guitar after the show, signed by the 4 surviving Deadheads. And it went for over $500,000. Wow, that's just an unbelievable amount of money for a guitar. And it didn't even have Jerry Garcia's name on it. Speaking of which, I much preferred the Garcia Dead lineup that played as the New Riders of the Purple Sage. That was a band. And I'm sure it's not just me, but it seems to have been a crazy week worldwide. And Martin, have a fantastic birthday. You are truly a beautiful person, one in a million, and one that can be truly called dear friend. And I guess based on the latest news, we can all sleep easier now that we have peace in our time. And I was listening to Truckin' the other day, and this verse grabbed me. Sometimes the light's all shining on me. Other times I can barely see. Lately it occurs to me, what a long, strange trip it's been. And friends, it's been a long, strange trip. A very long one. And this week we have an interesting combination. Tribes and journeys about another long, strange trip. And both stand for amazing things. The journey we all know. We all undergo. We travel the wastelands, a wilderness, seeking our promised land. Our land free from fear. And the tribes, we know who they were, how they were born. And I'll get to them a little bit later. This is the final reading from Numbers. And it's a double reading. The 42nd and 43rd parshas of the Torah. And in many ways, it is the end of the Torah. Because the next book, Deuteronomy, is very different and stands alone. I will talk about it next time. Friends, these are Matot and Maseh, tribes and journey. In fact, friends, if you move past thinking of the 5 books of Moses as being, written by Moses, you can see that the Torah books can be broken down into segments. Genesis, Exodus, and part of Numbers as being the stories from creation to the exiles of man. His fall into fear and slavery, his attempt to overcome dread and achieve freedom via his journey through his personal wilderness, his desert of lack and fear, with the death of his fearful self and reemergence of his newborn, God-blessed soul in his promised land. Then Leviticus, and the other part of Numbers, which is a codified set of rules and laws promoting and elevating an exclusive priestly class. And then next week, we'll begin Deuteronomy. In many ways, the most interesting of the books, considered by some to be what was once the missing book of the Torah, which was found hundreds and hundreds of years later, and by others as possibly being the only true book of Moses. In some ways, a summary of all the laws, and yet they are slightly different. And the stories, they are slightly different, brilliantly different. But first, the final journey of the tribes. And again, there's some amazing things if you can stay awake long enough to read through these 2 final parts. And forgive me, friends, because I do want to quote more from this week's reading than I normally do, because the words themselves are pretty incredible for what they say and for what they do not. And it opens with amazing rules around vows, and especially rules regarding vows made by women. First and foremost, it says that anyone making a vow has to stand by it. Numbers 33. According to all that issues from his mouth, he shall do. Well, that's pretty simple. But because women did not have full rights, the responsibility lay with her father or husband. And so there was a direct transference of consequences in the event that there was a problem. And Numbers 30:16 tells us, he shall bear her crime. Friends, having power over another person also means taking responsibility for that person's actions. If a man causes his wife to violate a vow she made, then it is he who must live with the consequences. That seems quite fair. And you may notice this passage uses 3 different words for the word vow. And the first is neder, a conditional promise made to God. If God will do, then I will do. Now, this is, of course, the primary type that we get to annul and call nidre from nadir. And don't forget, throughout these laws, there is the sense that the pronounced word, what comes out of the mouth, is a palpable entity with legally binding force. Remember, my friends, thoughts are things. Words are things. And if more people realize this, then, well, we then have a further complication to the women's rights to inherit. So that she could inherit, but then had to marry within her tribe. And I talked about that last week, and it will come up again later. Finally, the war with the Midianites that's been hinted at takes place, and the incredible distribution of booty amid some of the shocking instructions that Moses gives, and how he's told by God, get revenge for the children of Israel from the Midianites. After that, you'll be gathered to your people. Basically, do this, then I'm killing you. And they made war on Midian as the Lord had commanded Moses, and they killed every male. They killed Balaam. Now, this is a shock. Balaam has been pictured as a prophet who faithfully pronounced God's words, who blessed Israel, and thereby offends the Moabite king who hires him. Why is he killed? It is fascinating, and it's a fascinating read to see what the sages subsequently had to say. Oh, how we seek to justify. And when the war is over, then Moses says, so now, kill every male among the infants, and kill every woman who is known a man for male intercourse. Why are so many of the things that we find abhorrent suddenly acceptable if done by Israel? We condemn the Egyptians for doing the same thing. And we condemn any religious fanatics killing for God, but we eternally reward Phinehas. The rules are the rules for all. The God of Genesis is the God of all. We are mystified and horrified by the seeming barbarism of a massacre of women and children that Moses commands here. If Moses' anger over the fact that they have not killed the women and children is difficult to accept, how much more amazing is the fact that the women in question are Midianite, like Moses' wife. And we remember Abraham's deceit with Sarah about her being his sister because he said the Egyptians would kill him and keep her. But the only ones we actually ever see engaging in this practice are these Israelites under Moses. But still, we justify Abraham's actions. Now we then hear the instructions for conquering the promised land. Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you cross the Jordan to the land of Canaan, you shall dispossess all the residents of the land in front of you, and destroy all their carved figures. And you shall destroy all their molten images and demolish all of their high places, which is where they used to pray. And you shall take possession of the land and live in it, because I've given the land to you to possess it. And you shall give legacies of the land by lot, by your families. For the larger you shall make its legacy larger, and for the small you shall make its legacy smaller. Wherever the lot indicates, for it shall belong. You shall give legacies to the tribes of your fathers. And if you don't dispossess the residents of the land in front of you, then those whom you leave of them will become sticks in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they'll afflict you on the land in which you are living. That's a very interesting instruction. Kill everyone and take the land. Any who you leave will become a thorn in your side. And the land was to be given by lot, a very odd method since they had this complex census to determine land ownership. Now we then have this phenomenal section that we are presented with a summary of the entire journey of the people from when they left Egypt, from the day of the Passover. And it's found in Numbers 33:1. And friends, please forgive me, but I do want to share this section with you. They traveled from Ramses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month. On the day after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with a high hand before the eyes of all Egypt. And the children of Israel traveled from Ramses and camped in Succoth, and they traveled from Succoth and camped in Etham, which is at the edge of the wilderness. And they traveled from Etham and turned back towards Pi-hahiroth, which is in front of Baal-zephon, and they camped in front of Migdol. And they traveled from before Pi-hahiroth and passed through the sea to the wilderness. And they went 3 days' journey in the wilderness of Etham and camped in Marah. And they traveled from Marah and came to Elam, and in Elam there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there. And they traveled from Elam and camped by the Sea of Reeds, and they traveled from the Sea of Reeds and camped in the wilderness of Sin. And it goes on and on and on, and then they traveled, and they come to Alush, and they traveled from Alush and camped at Rephidim, where there was no water for the people to drink. And they traveled and camped in the wilderness of Sinai, and they traveled from the wilderness of Sinai and camped at Kibroth Hatava. And friends, it goes on and lists 14 more stops along the way. And I'm just going to jump ahead. And they traveled and camped in the wilderness of Zin, that is Kadesh. And they traveled from Kadesh and camped in Mount Hor at the edge of the land of Edom. And Aaron the priest went up into Mount Hor at the word of God and died there. In the 40th year after the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 5th month, on the 1st day of the month. And they traveled from Mount Hor and camped in Zalmona, and they traveled from Zalmona and camped in Punon, on and on again, until they come to in front of Nebo, and they traveled from the mountains of Abarim and camped in the plains of Moab by the Jordan towards Jericho, and they camped by the Jordan from Beth Jesimoth to Abel Shittim in the plains of Moab. Now friends, it's an amazing recap, a geographer's paradise. Take ancient maps, plot the route. How awesome! But did you notice? Not what was mentioned, but what was not. Not a word about the Epiphany. Not a word about the daily miracles, the cloud, the fire, the manna. Not a word about the water from the rocks. You know, we're told that the people had no water to drink, right? But nothing about the staff. Nothing about the tabernacle, the chiefs, that is that scouting mission of leaders, or as we like to say, spies, seeing the giants in the promised land and retreating back into their inculcated fear, and thus condemning an entire generation to death and a 40-year march. But we do get told how many trees and springs there were in Elim, and the central stop at Mount Sinai is not actually mentioned. Only a stay in the wilderness of Sinai. It's incredible when you read this, all the things that aren't there. But the instructions in this parsha that I actually wanted to address, and which I had mentioned a while ago when we were reading Leviticus, the priestly code, where it first appeared and where it will appear again later in the Deuteronomic code. And what has been in the news these past few weeks is this concept of the sanctuary city, because it's really talked about here. Now, it's not the same thing as what's going on in the States. The Torah says, and the cities that you shall give to the Levites, 6 cities of refuge that you shall give for the manslayer to flee there. Manslayer and murderer. In Hebrew, the word is the same for an unintentional manslayer and for a murderer. We determine which is meant in each sentence by the context. In English, we have 2 words. And so the appropriate word is used for each case. But God explains, there shall be cities of refuge for you, and a manslayer who strikes a life by mistake shall flee there. The cities for refuge from an avenger, so the manslayer will not die until he stands in front of the congregation for judgment. There will be a trial. These 6 cities shall be for refuge for the children of Israel, and for the alien, and for the visitor among them, for anyone who strikes a life by mistake to flee there. The concept is brilliant. It's for everybody, not just for Israelis, for anybody who takes a life by mistake. Now, unlike the situation which is dominating U.S. politics right now, and which somewhat pushed handing a nuclear weapon to Iran to the back pages prior to the deal, the biblical concept was to provide temporary haven to ensure justice was done, and to prevent vigilante or revenge killing. It was only when a life were taken, and there were actually rules in place regarding the type of weapon, and therefore the outcome. In many ways, the type or material determined whether it was accidental or not. Numbers 35:16 laid it all out. If he struck him with an iron item so that he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. If he struck him with a stone in the hand by which one could die so that he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. If he struck him with a wooden object in the hand by which one could die so that he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. These are all objects which, if used, could be lethal, and they are about striking another, in which case intent exists. It's not an accident. The intent speaks to the nature of the crime. Strike someone with something you know can kill because of its purpose, the outcome is automatic. Death to the striker. Anyone who strikes a life, the murderer shall be murdered by the mouth of witnesses. By the mouth. Words are palpable. And one witness shall not testify against a person so as to die. A person cannot be condemned for execution on the testimony of only one witness. There must be two or more. And you shall not take a ransom for a murderer's life, because he did wrong so as to die, but he shall be put to death. There was no prison system. Sanctuary was granted to ensure cooler heads prevailed and judgment could take place. But more to the point, friends, it brings us back to the idea actually of sacrifice, sacredness, and the life force within us all, blood. You see, we are reminded that the earth too is a living being. Blood will pollute the land. As conveyed at the beginning of the Torah, from the stories of Eden, Cain and Abel, and the flood, the earth's environment suffers from human wrongdoing. The ground is cursed on your account. You're cursed from the ground that opened its mouth to take your brother's blood. The earth was corrupted because all flesh had corrupted its way on the earth. Human violence and corruption have consequences not only for the immediate victims, and not even only for other humans, but for the condition of the earth and nature. Murder is not only a sin against the victim, it is a sin against the earth. And friends, God does not want his home polluted. You shall not make the land impure in which you are living, in which I tent, because I, the Lord, tent among the children of Israel. If he doesn't want to live in a polluted environment, why do we? And if anybody wants to know how the church ultimately became involved as places of sanctuary, well, originally, a manslayer could stay in the asylum town until the current high priest died. And that might have actually originated in ancient Egypt, where asylum towns were governed by the local priests. So the connection between asylum and spiritual institutions and the life of the priest have actually always been connected. Now, as I said earlier, I do want to make a comment about the tribes. We know who they were and how they were born. That is the one thing the whole world knows. And I was recently reminded of the words of Mark Twain, who said in 1897, if the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1/4 of the human race. It suggests a nebulous puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of. But he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also very out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Persians rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greeks and Romans followed and made a vast noise, and they were gone. Other people have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now and have vanished. The Jew saw them all, survived them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakness of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert but aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jews. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? Oh, wouldn't everyone like to know? Don't forget, friends, The Torah is not necessarily to be understood as a chronological book starting at A and ending at Z. It flows this way and that way, combining stories, weaving lessons, meandering through a timeline that is not just past, present, and future. It unifies time with space, and that is sacred. And it uses the journey as the unifying element because it functions through time by a chronology of events, and it functions through space by the geographical placement of events along the route. Those are those tribes. Take off your watches for just one day and experience time in a new fashion. As the Grateful Dead sang in Fire on the Mountain, almost ablaze till you don't feel the heat. It takes all you got just to stay on the beat. You say it's a living, we all got to eat, but you're here alone. There's no one to compete. Well, friends, we are not here alone. We have always been here for each other, and maybe that is one of the secrets Mark Twain was talking about. The world is sacred, and so is everything in it. Express your gratitude. Friends, light a candle, make a wish. Celebrate your life and the lives of those you love. Share your feelings with them. Live free, be free. Honor your freedom. Be well, be happy, be blessed. Share and honor the light and all who live in the light, and continue to shine. Continue to send everyone you know goodwill and love. Pray for peace and freedom for everyone, and end to terror and hatred. And remember, friends, we are a community. We learn together, we celebrate each other, we love each other. We share this ride together, men and women equally. And friends, it's going to take time, a whole lot of precious time. It's going to take patience and time to do it right. Thank you all. Love you. See y'all next time. And I do love seeing you again. And remember, your wishes do come true. Bless you all. Shabbat Shalom. Take care. Bye.